Have you ever wondered why the most powerful transformations in a woman's life are not found in the moments she gains something, but in the moments she dares to let go? The sacred goodbye is not just a departure from a man, a lover, or an illusion. It is a farewell to the fragments of herself that begged for crumbs, the shadows that clung to validation, and the illusions that whispered she was not enough. In Jungian terms, this goodbye is an act of individuation, the soul pulling itself back from projections, reclaiming its scattered light from the faces of men who could never hold it. A woman stands at the threshold of her own silence. She has cried, begged, explained, and performed the 1,000 dances of accommodation, hoping that he would finally see her. But he doesn't. Not because she is unseen, but because his eyes are filled with his own shadow. He projects his unhealed wounds upon her, his insecurities dressed as criticism, his fears masked as control, and for too long she thought his perception defined her worth. That was her first wound, believing that his gaze was a mirror, when in truth, it was only smoke. The sacred goodbye is born not in anger, but in clarity. When the woman finally whispers enough to herself, she is no longer speaking to him. She is speaking to the frightened child within her, who once equated love with suffering, who thought pain was proof of devotion. Jung wrote that until the unconscious is made conscious, it directs your life and you call it fate. And so she sees now, the endless repetition of men who wounded her in the same way was not fate, but an unconscious loyalty to her own shadow. Have you ever noticed how silence terrifies a man who is used to your pleading? He thrives when you explain, when you justify, when you show him your heart bleeding on the floor. But when you stop explaining, when you rise in silence, he feels the cold absence of his supply. Because he was never in love with your soul, he was in love with the reflection of his ego in your suffering. That is why the sacred goodbye is not simply walking away. It is the refusal to play the role he wrote for you in his unconscious play. But make no mistake, this act is not easy. It feels like death. Because it is a death, the death of who you were while you tolerated, the death of the mask you wore to be loved, the death of the girl who thought her value was negotiable. Grief floods in, not for the man himself, but for the years you lost while hoping he would become something he was never capable of being. The Stoics remind us, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. You do not grieve the man, you grieve the illusions you wove around him. In that grief, you begin shadow work. You ask yourself the most difficult questions. Why did I stay? Why did I allow his silence to define me? Why did I confuse control with passion? And slowly, with brutal honesty, you see the truth. You were not weak. You were loyal to a wound. You were loyal to the part of you that still longed for your father's recognition, your mother's warmth, the childhood approval you never fully received. Every time he withheld, you tried harder, because your unconscious believed that if you could win this man's love, you would finally heal the old wound. But healing does not come from reenacting the trauma. Healing comes when you stop playing the game altogether. The sacred goodbye is the moment you refuse to keep seeking medicine from the very poison that sickened you. That is why it changes everything. Not because the man changes, but because you do. And here is the paradox. The moment you stop chasing, stop begging, stop performing, the man often comes running back. He senses his grip loosening, and suddenly he is full of promises, apologies, desperate affection. But beware, this is not love. This is panic. He is not awakened, he is threatened. And if you return, you will find yourself in the same cycle again. Because what has changed in him? Nothing. What has changed in you? Everything. So you do not return. You let the silence stretch. You allow the discomfort to carve its way through your bones. You hold your ground while your inner child screams to go back. And slowly, a new voice rises within you. It is calm. It is steady. It does not beg. It does not chase. It whispers, "You were always enough." That is the initiation of individuation. The sacred goodbye is not a single act, it is a threshold. Once crossed, you are no longer the same. You no longer walk as a woman who waits for permission to be worthy. You walk as a woman who knows her worth exists independent of any gaze, any hand, any promise. The woman who has said her sacred goodbye discovers an inner world she had never truly inhabited before. It is a landscape of silence and reflection, where echoes of past dependence fade into the quiet hum of self-possession. Here, the psyche begins to reorganize itself, weaving together fragments of identity she had scattered across relationships and illusions. Jung believed that the unconscious is not an enemy, but a treasury of truths waiting to be claimed, and in this solitude she finally steps into that treasury. He observes the patterns that once ensnared her, the magnetic pull toward men who could not see her, the seductive allure of chaos disguised as passion, the way her compassion was mistaken for weakness. Each memory, each heartbreak, each moment of self-erasure reveals itself not as shame, but as a message from her own soul. The pain had a purpose. It taught her the boundary between love and projection, desire and possession, intimacy and control. And now she reads these lessons like ancient scripture, every line illuminated by newfound awareness. It is in this recognition that she begins to embody what modern psychology calls radical self-worth. Not the fleeting confidence that rises with compliments or attention, but the unshakable understanding that she is complete, that her value does not hinge upon another's validation. Stoic philosophy whispers alongside Jungian insight, seek not the good in external things, the good lies within you. And she feels it, this profound, tremulous power that arises when the self is no longer tethered to the approval of a man who never understood her. Yet the journey is not purely rational. The unconscious speaks in metaphor, in dreams, in the sudden swell of emotions that seem unbidden. She may dream of fire, of doors closing, of being carried over water. Each image, each symbol is a dialogue between her conscious mind and her deeper self. To ignore these messages is to deny the self its path toward wholeness. She learns to interpret them not as omens of loss, but as markers of evolution. She begins to see the world not through the lens of scarcity and lack, but as a landscape of choice and sovereignty. The men who linger in her orbit are no longer the same either. Some are drawn to her because she radiates an unclaimed energy, a freedom they cannot possess. Others vanish entirely, unprepared for a woman who refuses to be contained. The sacred goodbye acts like a cleansing flame, separating the illusions from the realities, the projections from the truth. In its aftermath, she understands that attraction is not created through pleading or sacrifice, but through alignment with the authentic self. A man's desire can only reflect the depth of her self-possession if it is not coerced, if it is not demanded, if it is not fueled by fear or need. In this phase of transformation, she also confronts the shadow within herself, the part that clings to old fears, that still hesitates in vulnerability, that still doubts her own worth. She does not deny it. She dialogues with it. She names it, witnesses it, and allows it to exist without letting it dictate her actions. This is the core of Jungian empowerment, integration rather than repression. The shadow, once a source of unconscious suffering, becomes an ally, revealing hidden strengths, unacknowledged desires, and the raw, unrefined essence of her authenticity. And as she walks further into this self-realized state, she encounters what can only be described as magnetic authors. Inticity. People, friends, lovers, strangers are drawn not merely to her appearance or charm, but to the clarity of her presence. She no longer compromises to fit expectations. She no longer shrinks to make others comfortable. Her interactions are conscious, deliberate, and resonant. Every boundary she sets is not defensive but declarative, a statement that she belongs first and foremost to herself. The sacred goodbye, once painful and necessary, now manifests as a luminous force in her everyday life. She also discovers a curious irony. The more she detaches from the desire for external validation, the more she inspires it. Men who once ignored her may attempt to reclaim her attention, but now she observes with quiet discernment. She does not react, she evaluates. Desire, she understands, is only meaningful when it intersects with choice, and she is no longer available to anyone who cannot meet her in full presence with mutual respect and alignment. The woman learns, finally, that attraction, love, and connection are not rewards to be earned. They are reflections of wholeness already realized within. The sacred goodbye is not just a parting. It is a threshold into a life where she chooses freely, loves profoundly, and lives sovereignly. In the quiet aftermath of her sacred goodbye, she begins to notice subtle shifts in the way she inhabits the world. Her gestures grow deliberate, her words carry weight. The trembling need to impress, to justify, to explain, fades like mist under the morning sun. Where once she had sought love through sacrifice, she now discovers that power lies in presence, in the unshakable alignment with her own truth. Each step she takes is a reclamation of energy that was once surrendered to unworthy hands, each breath a reaffirmation that her essence is not for bargaining. She recalls the patterns she once mistook for destiny, men who were inconsistent, unreliable, emotionally absent. She remembers her own responses, her apologies, her rationalizations, her desperate attempts to be enough. Now she understands that these were not failings, but unconscious enactments of deeper wounds. Jung wrote of the compulsion to repeat the trauma of the past. She has seen it clearly, and now she refuses to be a willing actor in anyone else's unresolved drama. The sacred goodbye has awakened discernment, the ability to perceive the difference between projection and reality, between desire that nourishes and desire that drains. Yet freedom is not merely the absence of attachment, it is also the confrontation with loneliness. For a time, she stands alone in her own company, face to face with the parts of herself she once ignored. This solitude is not emptiness. It is the crucible in which self-worth is forged. Every echo of longing, every shadow of doubt, every pang of fear becomes an opportunity to cultivate resilience. She learns to meet herself with compassion, to honor her emotions without surrendering her sovereignty. In this alchemy, grief transforms into wisdom, loss into clarity, despair into courage. There is a sacred irony in this solitude. As she releases the compulsion to be needed, she becomes undeniably magnetic. Her energy no longer clings, it flows. She moves through spaces with a calm authority, an unspoken assurance that she is complete unto herself. Men sense it instinctively. They are drawn not to what she can give, but to the fullness of what she already embodies. Desire, when it arises, is no longer born of fear or scarcity. It is a reflection of her radiant self-possession. In essence, she becomes both the mirror and the light. The process also reveals a deeper understanding of love itself. She realizes that love is not a transaction, nor a performance, nor a tool for validation. Love is the recognition of another's wholeness while fully inhabiting her own. It is the absence of need, the refusal to control, the surrender of expectation. She sees clearly that the men who once unsettled her, who once held power over her emotions, were never intended to be anchors. They were teachers. Through their absence, their indifference, and their projections, she is learning the profound art of self-containment. And with self-containment comes discernment. She no longer mistakes intensity for commitment, nor desire for permanence. She observes without obsession, engages without attachment, and speaks without fear of judgment. Every interaction becomes a test of alignment. Does this energy honor my sovereignty, or does it demand compromise of my essence? The answer is now visible in her posture, in the calm of her gaze, in the unspoken boundaries she has etched into her life. The sacred goodbye also illuminates the subtle dynamics of attraction that the unconscious mind often misunderstands. She sees how neediness distorts desire, how scarcity diminishes presence, how chasing drives men away while detachment draws them closer. She witnesses this pattern not as a manipulator, but as a sovereign observer, understanding that the power she once sought externally resides now within her. Her aura carries the quiet authority of someone who no longer negotiates for love, someone who has claimed herself as her first and ultimate devotion. Even intimacy transforms. She realizes that true connection cannot thrive where dependence or fear exist. Vulnerability, once dangerous, becomes sacred, a deliberate offering, not a surrender. She approaches relationships as an equal, not as a petitioner, and in doing so she encounters a deeper, more authentic resonance with others. Every touch, every word, every glance becomes an expression of mutual respect, of conscious desire, of shared sovereignty. Through the sacred goodbye, she learns the ultimate truth, that freedom is not found in being chosen, but in choosing oneself. Every man, every relationship, every fleeting attraction becomes a reflection of her inner wholeness rather than a determinant of it. The world, once a place of uncertainty and longing, becomes a stage for her deliberate power, a mirror reflecting the depth of her self-possession back to her. And as she steps fully into this sovereign self, she begins to understand the quiet, relentless truth of desire. It is not conquest, it is resonance. It is not possession, it is reflection. Men who once seemed so vital in her emotional economy now appear as passing shadows, their presence no longer capable of dictating her inner climate. She learns that the heart can expand without fear, that affection can arrive without obligation, that intimacy can exist without dependency. The sacred goodbye has opened a channel between her conscious self and her unconscious depth, and through this connection she moves with a grace that is both terrifying and magnetic. She notices how the ego reacts to this new power. Old fears of rejection, abandonment, invisibility arise, demanding attention, seeking to convince her that independence is isolation, that self-possession is arrogance. But she meets these fears not with panic, but with recognition. She understands that they are merely echoes of the past, reverberations of unmet needs and unresolved wounds. She allows them space, observes them without judgment, and watches as their intensity diminishes. In doing so, she practices the art of emotional sovereignty. She is no longer a hostage to impulse or history. The sacred goodbye also teaches her about projection, the unconscious way humans cast their unacknowledged traits onto others. She realizes that the men who criticized her, dismissed her, or manipulated her were only reflecting what she had not yet reconciled within herself. Each interaction becomes a mirror, revealing parts of her own shadow that were once denied or feared. And in embracing these shadows, in understanding their origins and meanings, she achieves what Jung called individuation, the integration of the conscious and unconscious, the reclamation of fragmented selfhood, the emergence of authenticity unthreatened by external evaluation. This journey reshapes her understanding of attraction. She sees that desire is not stirred by compliance, nor sustained by sacrifice. Men are drawn to the fullness of a woman who walks in her own light, who does not seek validation, who does not shrink to accommodate their insecurities. Her power is subtle, yet undeniable. It is the calm certainty that comes from knowing her worth is intrinsic, not conditional. This power does not boast, does not plead, does not manipulate. It simply exists, and in its existence it commands recognition. Yet she also observes the fragile illusions of attachment. The men who once seemed indispensable are now optional. Their approval, their love, their attention, these are no longer currencies she must earn. She feels the liberation that comes from detachment, the exhilarating clarity that arises when one no longer ties self-esteem to the caprice of another's affection. In their absence, she finds herself fully present. In their unpredictability, she discovers her own constancy. The sacred goodbye has not only removed the unnecessary, it has revealed the essential, herself. And with this revelation comes choice. She understands that she can engage or withdraw, give or withhold, open or protect, without guilt, without fear, without compromise of her essence. Every relationship is now a dance of mutual alignment rather than a struggle for approval. She can meet desire with discernment, affection with awareness, passion with integrity. She can love without losing herself because she has learned the art of self-possession, the quiet yet unshakable sovereignty of one who has claimed her own soul. Through this process, the woman also recognizes the timeless wisdom of Stoic philosophy. The external world, she understands, is neither benevolent nor malevolent. It simply is. Men may praise or ignore, desire or dismiss, yet these events hold no intrinsic power over her equilibrium. Her strength lies in her response, in her inner discipline, in her refusal to grant sway to forces she cannot control. She practices this daily, moment by moment, until resilience becomes instinct and sovereignty becomes her natural posture. The sacred goodbye, then, is not merely a story of loss, it is a crucible of transformation. Pain becomes a teacher, absence becomes a guide, detachment becomes empowerment. Through conscious reflection, shadow integration, and the cultivation of self-worth, she emerge as not as someone who seeks to be completed by another, but as someone already whole. Her presence is magnetic, her gaze unwavering, her choice sovereign. The world may attempt to pull her back into old patterns, but she meets each test with the calm authority of one who knows herself. And in this emergence, she discovers an almost mystical truth. The more she honors her own boundaries, the more the world aligns with her. The men who once brought chaos now observe her in awe. Those who once dismissed her now approach with conscious desire, and yet she no longer needs their validation. They are no longer the axis of her emotional life. They are simply reflections, temporary companions along a path she alone navigates with clarity, strength, and purpose. In the culmination of this sacred transformation, she reaches a profound state of emotional freedom. The past, with all its pain, longing, and unhealed wounds, no longer dictates her rhythm. Every memory that once shackled her now serves as a guidepost, a silent teacher whispering the lessons of resilience, self-respect, and authenticity. She has learned to distinguish between desire that nourishes and desire that diminishes, between intimacy that elevates and attachment that confines. In this space she is neither reactive nor defensive. She simply is, a presence that commands without demanding, radiates without seeking. She observes men with clarity, seeing their unconscious patterns, their projections, their attempts to claim or destabilize her. And rather than fear or chase, she responds with measured discernment. Their behaviors no longer elicit desperation or pleading, but awareness and choice. She recognizes the illusions of control and the seduction of need, and she steps aside from both. In this quiet mastery, she discovers the paradoxical power. By releasing, she attracts. By detaching, she commands. By honoring herself, she inspires reverence. Love itself transforms in her perception. She realizes it is not the frantic pursuit or the clinging dependence that binds hearts, but the sacred alignment of two autonomous souls. Vulnerability becomes deliberate, not coerced. Intimacy becomes a reflection of mutual wholeness, not a negotiation of scarcity. She engages with men as an equal, offering her presence without surrender, her desire without desperation, and in return, the connection is not transactional or conditional, it is authentic. Electrified by respect, tempered by freedom, and sustained by conscious choice. The sacred goodbye, once agonizing, now reveals its ultimate gift. She has reclaimed herself. Her worth is no longer tethered to another's approval, her joy no longer contingent on fleeting attention. She moves through the world as an agent of her own narrative, a sovereign who creates, chooses, and commands her reality. Each boundary she enforces is an affirmation of her self-possession. Each refusal is a declaration of her discernment. The chaos that once drew her into surrender now highlights the calm strength of her independence. Her shadow, once a source of pain and confusion, is now integrated into her consciousness. She embraces the traits she once feared, her intensity, her depth, her refusal to compromise essence for comfort. She no longer fears judgment or rejection, because she understands that external perception is a reflection of the observer's own unconscious landscape. In this integration, she becomes whole, a composite of light and shadow, vulnerability and strength, desire and sovereignty. She is fully present, fully alive, and fully herself. Even the men who once dominated her thoughts or stirred her insecurities now appear in a new light. Some retreat, unable to meet her in this elevated state. Others approach with authentic curiosity, recognizing the completeness she exudes. She does not need to chase, negotiate, or prove herself. Their responses, whether longing or indifference, no longer disrupt her equilibrium. She is no longer at the mercy of their attention, for she has learned the ultimate mastery. The only validation that matters is the one she grants herself. Every interaction, every glance, every choice becomes a reflection of this mastery. She moves through relationships and encounters not as a seeker, but as a sovereign being whose love and desire are consciously offered, not unconsciously traded. She has become magnetic because she is unbound, luminous because she is whole, and irresistible because she is authentic. This is the paradox of true feminine power. It is gentle yet unyielding, inviting yet unpossessable, visible yet unattached. The sacred goodbye is thus more than a farewell, it is a rebirth. It is the moment when she steps fully into herself, shedding old narratives, dissolving toxic attachments, and embracing the full depth of her being. It is the point at which the past ceases to dictate her future, when grief becomes wisdom, loss becomes clarity, and separation becomes liberation. Every choice she makes thereafter is rooted in consciousness rather than compulsion, in sovereignty rather than fear, in self-love rather than projection. And in this final stage of transformation, she achieves what many never dare to: complete emotional autonomy. She walks the world with the quiet assurance that her value is intrinsic, her heart is sovereign, and her soul is untouchable by those who cannot meet her in fullness. She has crossed the threshold from longing to fulfillment, from dependence to independence, from fragmented identity to radiant wholeness. The sacred goodbye, which once seemed so terrifying, now reveals itself as the most profound gift she could have ever given herself.